In a surprise visit to U.S. troops in Iraq, President Trump stands by his order to pull American soldiers out of Syria. While critics warn against a hasty withdrawal, it's reported Afghanistan could be next. What is Trump's strategy, and how will the region fare with his decisions? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Donald Trump made an unannounced visit to U.S. troops in Iraq the day after Christmas. He'd been criticized for not going to a conflict zone in the 2 years since becoming president. The trip only lasted 3 hours, and he didn't meet any of Iraq's leadership. But he used the opportunity to defend his decision to withdraw American soldiers from Syria.
Our presence in Syria was not open-ended and was never intended to be permanent. 8 years ago, we went there for 3 months and we never left. But what a job you have done, what a job they have done. I made it clear from the beginning that our mission in Syria was to strip ISIS of its military strongholds. We're not nation building. Rebuilding Syria will require a political solution, and it's a solution that should be paid for by its very rich neighboring countries, not the United States. Let them pay for it, and they will. They will. In fact, Saudi Arabia yesterday, you probably read, stepped up to the plate and has already made a commitment of substantial funds for development. And President Erdogan of Turkey has also agreed to take out any remnants of ISIS, and we'll be working with them.
But Trump's claim over Saudi funding has been debunked by a Saudi embassy official in Washington and a spokesperson for the U.S. National Security Council. The kingdom has not made any new financial pledge for Syria since August. But let's have a look at how many U.S. troops are in some of these countries. American forces arrived in Syria in 2015. Recently, there were 2,000 there. And there are 5,000 who remain in Iraq. The initial deployment happened in 2003. And 14,000 are based in Afghanistan in America's longest-running war, which began in 2001. All right, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Baghdad, Ali Nashmi, professor of political history at Al-Mustansiriya University. From Sanibel Island in Florida on Skype, Peter Galbraith, former United States ambassador and former deputy United Nations envoy to Afghanistan. And in London, Afzal Ashraf, assistant professor of international relations at the University of Nottingham. Welcome to the program. Ali Al-Nashmi, I want to start with you. There was supposed to be a meeting taking place between President Trump and the Iraqi prime minister. That didn't happen. The reports are that it was because the parameters of the meeting could not be agreed to. What kind of a message does that send to Iraqi leadership?
No, I think that Mr. Trump, he carried many messages in his visit. One of that message to the Iraqi government, this message means he didn't didn't have any respect for that government or that staff. And they called the Iraqi government when he reached to the base of Al-Assad. And after that, they called him to the Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi to come to that base, to that military base, to meet him in that place, in order that Mr. al-Mahdi, in that time, he was out of Baghdad. He cannot reach in that time. They give him just 1 hour. This is, I think, it's very insulting for the Iraqi government. And in order that the Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi, he refused to meet him because he can't meet him in the base, because he called him to come to Baghdad just a few minutes. He refused. He said, I can't, my procedures do not allow me to come. In order that that meeting was finished and they didn't meet in that time.
Peter Galbraith, Iraqi officials must have also been shocked by President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria and Afghanistan. Was one of the objectives of this trip also to boost the Iraqi government's confidence in the U.S.?
It's hard to believe that that's the case, given particularly the fact that no arrangements were made with the Iraqi government to have meetings. And that, incidentally, is different from what President Obama did when he went to Iraq in 2009, or the various trips that President Bush made. Even when the U.S. was the occupation authority, he met with the Iraqi political leaders. So this trip wasn't about Iraq. It wasn't about Syria. It was about one person, Donald Trump. He'd been accused of being a coward for not having visited troops in combat, of not having respected the servicemen on the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I by canceling a trip to Belleau Woods, the scene of a very major battle, because it was raining. And this also appeared, although the trip must have been planned in advance, and the same day as a New York Times story appeared, page one story, making clear that the reason he got a draft deferment from Vietnam was because the podiatrist that diagnosed the bone spurs was in fact a tenant of his father, a real estate developer, and got a sweetheart deal. So this was Donald Trump responding to criticism about being a coward. It had very little to do with Iraq or Iraqi policy, and of course done with the characteristic lack of diplomatic skill that has characterized this administration.
Afzal Ashraf, this trip comes at a time of increased tensions between President Trump and top military leadership in the U.S. Is this trip to Iraq going to do anything to alleviate that?
I'm not sure that this particular trip is going to change the relationship between President Trump and his military leadership, because the relationship has already been affected by his decision to withdraw troops from Syria. General Mattis, his Secretary of Defense, has resigned on that basis. This particular trip, I think, will probably enhance, if anything, some of his support within the military. There is a difference I detect, having served under US military command, between the political, if you like, level of leadership in the Pentagon and the troops on the ground. The troops on the ground fight very bravely, but recognize that what they do at best provides very short-term solutions. They recognize the complexity of the situation, and they realize, I think, that there is no long-term effective strategy. That, I think, is something that Mr. Trump's political rhetoric has chimed with greatly. He has always said that we don't have an effective strategy in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and that we should withdraw from these countries. And I think the Syrian decision plays into that. And all of this, I think, chimes at the lower levels of military command, who recognize that, if you like, some truth in what he's saying.
Ali al-Nashmi, Mr. Trump told reporters that the U.S. might base American commandos on the border in Iraq to launch raids and other missions into Syria going forward, if that was needed. Now, is this something that the U.S. would need to get permission from the Iraqi government to do? And what do Iraqi officials think about this statement?
No, I think what he said yesterday, he said we are still in Iraq because, you know, there is many voices arises yesterday and last weeks when Mr. Trump his decision to withdraw, America withdraw from Syria, in order that many politicians in Washington say this is a bad message for the extremists, and he coming to Iraq to prove against that. He say we will stay in Iraq, we will stay in the Middle East, and we will make a very wide base in Iraq. That base, it will be ready for any interference in Syria and in to controlling the Middle East. Even he say about Iran, and that in order that I think that declaring so they throat 8 chateau in the history of the street of Iraq and the Iraqi people, and talking now about that declaration, because you know the pact signed between Iraq and United States in 2009, that one term said we will not leave any bases in Iraq. In order that I think there's some change in that pact was signed between Iraqi government and American government. In order that I think many voices arise now in the Iraqi parliament to collect and to meet about this change and about his declaration and when the American forces withdraw from Syria, coming to the Iraqi side. In order, I think there is now in Iraq it's more than 7,000 American in that place. But the beginning when they fighting in 2014 say we will send only 500 soldiers and officials, but now it's more than 7,000. I think many things will happen next week about this declaration.
Peter Galbraith, it was widely known, of course, that President Trump had wanted to withdraw troops from Afghanistan for some time now. He eventually came around to the thinking that had been espoused by Secretary of Defense, or outgoing Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis. I want you to take a listen to something that President Trump said in 2017.
A hasty withdrawal would create a vacuum that terrorists, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, would instantly fill, just as happened before September 11th. And as we know, in 2011, America hastily and mistakenly withdrew from Iraq. As a result, our hard-won gains slipped back into the hands of terrorist enemies. Our soldiers watched as cities they had fought for and bled to liberate and won were occupied by a terrorist group called ISIS. The vacuum we created by leaving too soon gave safe haven for ISIS to spread, to grow, recruit, and launch attacks. We cannot repeat in Afghanistan the mistake our leaders made in Iraq.
Peter, how does one go about reconciling what President Trump said then in 2017 with his strategy now as withdrawing troops from Syria and Afghanistan?
It's hard to reconcile, and I think what one has to understand is the speech he delivered in 2017 was written for him by his advisors, but it really didn't reflect his own sentiments. What one has to know about Syria is that a week before he announces the decision to withdraw, his presidential envoy, Brett McGurk, is announcing that we're going to be staying for a long time. His envoy for Syria, Ambassador James Jeffries, has said that we would be there as long as Iran was present and as long as Assad was in power. So there's just been enormous confusion about the policy. And Trump, in the case of the withdrawal from Afghanistan and Syria, was simply operating on his instincts rather than any strategy. Now, he has been a longtime critic of U.S. Sending forces abroad, and he says the U.S. is being played for suckers, and I think that this really reflects that instinct.
Afzal Ashraf, President Trump said during his trip that he believes a lot of people are going to come around to his way of thinking on his decision with regard to Syria. Is there any evidence to indicate that more people are actually coming around to his way of thinking on that?
Well, I think there is no objective evidence unless you want to do a very detailed analysis of Twitter and so on, and that's, of course, a very problematic issue. There's a great deal of support from his followers for this. The argument they put forward is very persuasive in that there has never really been a clear strategy in any of these conflicts. And I think that the failure of that strategy rests not just with Mr. Trump, but his previous administrations and the previous incumbents in the Pentagon. All the strategies that have actually been packaged as strategies have tended to be operational activities designed to suppress any opposition militarily, rather than actually deliver a win which can be recognized as a victory by all sides, not just domestically but internationally and certainly by the adversaries in the particular countries. So Mr. Trump, for whatever reason, does have, I think, a great deal of support, both publicly but also factually. There is no winning strategy in any of these countries, sadly. And he is absolutely right that when he reads out, as Ambassador Galbraith has pointed out, he was reading out a statement that a rapid withdrawal could lead to a power vacuum, but even a slow withdrawal would result in exactly the same thing. And I think what Mr. Trump has done is run out of patience with those who've written these statements for him, that they haven't produced a plan which is reasonably short-term, which provides that gradual withdrawal. So I think his instincts are probably going to be borne out by history, and I think he will possibly get a great deal of support from the American public as a result of this.
Peter Galbraith, what do you think? Do you think that President Trump will get a great deal of support from the American public for doing this?
No, partly because the American involvement in these places is very small, and so this is not a big political issue. But he certainly has been criticized for the withdrawal from Syria, including by his own party, because what he's done is he supported an ally, essentially the Syrian Kurds, in a conflict where they were the ground troops and the Americans provided advisors and the Air Force. They went far beyond areas that had any Kurdish population at the urging of the United States. And then at the moment in which victory was very close, he announces the pullout of the troops and makes this decision in a call with Turkish President Erdogan. After Erdogan says that he's going to go in. And of course, Erdogan's target is not the remnants of ISIS. It is the Syrian Kurds. And in fact, the purpose of the call was to get Erdogan not to go in. And it had just the opposite impact. And the message there is that the United States is not a reliable ally, that at least under this administration, you can't trust the United States. And that's a message that will be taken aboard, not just by the Syrian Kurds, but by the Afghan government, perhaps by the Kurdistan, already by the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, which was double-crossed by the Americans in 2017, by the Iraqi government, and of course the Iranians, who are the big winners here, both from Trump's decisions in Iraq last year and this year in Syria. They're very pleased because they see that they don't need to do anything to undermine the United States because Trump is doing it himself.
Ali Nashmi, there has been criticism that has come from some Iraqi members of parliament about President Trump's visit. So where is the overall relationship right now between the U.S. and Iraq? And as far as ordinary Iraqi citizens, what is the sentiment there as far as having U.S. troops remain in Iraq?
No, I think now what's happened yesterday and the declaration of the statement of Mr. Trump, I think it's the speech of Iraqi people now, and all the majority of the Iraqi people now, they refuse that interference and that insulting for the Iraqi government. Then all the Iraqi people and they are looking for the future. What is the future? And what will doing that when the American forces withdraw from Syria? What doing in Iraq? And you know the supporting for the Iraqi military just for only the jets on the satellite, then why they're increasing that supervisors and the fighters or the soldiers in that base? We don't need it. Even in the center of the fighting between the Iraqi troops and the ISILs, American, it's more than just 4,000 soldiers. Now, why they increase them? This is the Iraqi people now. They're talking about the future. It's that change for the American global policy strategy in the Middle East, and is that against Iran? Because he mentioned that in his speech, that's also to be more nurturing Iran and Syria to interfere anyway, because you know the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people refuse to make Iraqi as a base to attack any places, just ISIL. In order that the Iraqi people, they know they're pushing, or they increase their pushing to the Iraqi government to say something about what's happening, and to say the Iraqi, where is the Iraqi voice? Where is all but what's happening yesterday and last week's, there's nothing for the Iraqi people. In order that, I think, in the future, just a few days in the future, the Iraqi streets, and you know, the Iranian side have many allies in the street of Iraq, then they will move their allies in the street, and we say maybe protesters in the street against what's happening yesterday about a new policy of America in Iraq.
Afzal Ashraf, I want to turn for a minute to Afghanistan. You know, America's greatest leverage there in negotiating with the Taliban is the fact that they have troops there. So does it look now like President Trump has met one of the primary demands of the Taliban before, you know, negotiations progress?
Well, if he does pull out troops, then yes, he will have met the demands, and then some negotiated settlement can probably take place. But of course, one of the problems with meeting the demand of withdrawal is that about 15 years ago, the Taliban declared victory for them as being the withdrawal of troops. So by meeting that demand, he is actually acknowledging from the point of view of the Taliban that they have been victorious in this conflict. And that has some very significant political and military repercussions beyond this particular conflict. But I think that one of the things that we should consider here is to separate the personality. Mr. Trump, of course, has attracted a great deal of criticism, sometimes legitimately, in many cases legitimately, from the American institutions, be they defense, foreign policy, and so on, for being a bit of a maverick. That may well be true, but the fact is that the policies, the strategic culture that the US has been involved in has not led to success. The culture of regime change, the culture of proxies, and this myth that we stand by our proxies, it's never actually been real. The US is a realist foreign policy. It has used proxies in Afghanistan and dumped them when its purpose has been met. It's done the same thing in Syria. And this is a message that I think needs to be understood, because proxy warfare, regime change, all of these things are no longer possible. There has been virtually no success as a result of these policies. The repercussions, the long-term repercussions of these interventions is huge. It's huge in terms of terrorism, ISIS and the like, but it's also huge in terms of politics in Europe, with a huge number of displaced people seeking asylum and causing a very significant change in the political landscape in Europe, and possibly in the longer term also impacting North America. So I think there are some very big issues here, not just isolated interventions in Iraq, in Afghanistan and Syria. They all need to be taken in the context of US political and security culture. And I think time has now come for the US to re-examine it and change it to avoid the failures it's facing, because failures only breed failures. They do not lead to success. And whether Mr. Trump is making the right decisions or wrong decisions is not the point. It is the strategy and the political culture that needs to change.
All right, we have run out of time, so we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Ali Al-Nashmi, Peter Galbraith, and Afzal Ashraf. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.